up. There's some free tables at the front here, eh? You know you fellas don't have to sit at the back. In actual fact, those of you who are sitting kind of on this side here, if you do want to move so that you can see the panellists, kei au koutou te tikanga, up to you, but just FYI, you won't be able to see them by sitting basically from here across to my right. So if you do want to move, plenty of seats right here in front of the stage. Welcome back, everybody. It's so nice to have so many of you still here with us. We're on the home stretch. We have 2 more sessions left in our 2-day conference. And again, I'll just reiterate the fact that Rachel wasn't able to be with us today. Our thoughts are with her, as a family member is sick. So again, we are bringing the program forward, but one thing I did want to mention before we bring our panel up is the Sport New Zealand Leadership Program, Te Au Mātāhai, which is now open for applications. The 6-month program is aimed at people who lead teams, collaborative projects or smaller organisations. It is designed to create the conditions for leaders to expand and transform their mindsets, to develop more impactful and effective leadership. The next sector update will have all of the details about how you can apply for that leadership program. Now I'm going to move into what was supposed to be one of 2 of our concurrent sessions, but as I read out names, can I just get the panellists to come up onto the stage? This panel will be facilitated by Josh Margetts from Sport NZ, also a good boy from Pio, so ka pai. Up the Rams. And joining his panel of experts is Audry McLaren, Head of Funding, Foundation North, Leighton Evans, CEO of Rata Foundation, Paul Brown, Strategic Advisor to Businesses leading social change for relevant, sustainable impact, and research presenter John Saunders, Sport NZ. The panel will delve into the critical need for cost-saving measures, operational efficiencies and revenue diversification in the play, active recreation and sport sector. So can you please put your hands together for our panel and for Josh.
Kia ora koutou, ko Josh Margetts taku ingoa. E noho ana ahau ki Tāmaki Makaurau. I raro i te manaaki o te mana whenua, Ngāti Whātua Ōraki, tēnā rawa atu aku ki a rātou. Taku mahi I roto e te partnerships team e Sport NZ hi Aotearoa, nau mai me te haere mai. So my name's Josh Margetts. I live here in Tāmaki Makaurau under the care of Ngāti Whātua Ōraki. I thank you for that. And I work in the partnerships team at Sport New Zealand hi Aotearoa. Really happy to be here facilitating this session today. So when the organisers of this session were looking for a facilitator with high public profile, good stage presence and someone from a rural town in the King Country, I think they were expecting Jenny May. But you've got me instead, so I'm like the Timu version facilitator. But I'll do my best to live up to the high standards and up the Rams for the Ranfurly Shield. I was the one at the back shouting out around King Country representation. So really exciting session ahead. For the next 45 minutes, you're going to hear some incredible from some incredible people around the changing funding and participation environment. So we're hoping to give you a bit of a better understanding around some of the important trends, not fads, as Michael mentioned, and the implications for you and your own organisation. So participant or customer-centric wants and needs are really central to this kōrero today. And I guess what you can do to respond to those wants and needs. We'll highlight some real-world examples of successful cost-saving initiatives and also share some examples of revenue diversification and innovation. So I'll pass the mic over shortly to the range of experts who have got all the knowledge on all of these trends. But just a bit of a structure for today. So we're going to hear a brief intro and then go into a bit of an overview of some of the Sport New Zealand research into funding and participation trends, and then delve into a bit of a kōrero with the panellists from their own experiences for about 20 minutes or so, and leave a good sort of 10 minutes for audience questions. So like you've been encouraged to do, use the app and or just jot some questions down as they occur to you so we can pull those at the end. So first up, Leighton Evans, we're going to come to you for a short intro. Leighton, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your role with Rata Foundation.
Kia ora, Josh. Called Leighton Evans Aho. Yeah, so I'm at the Rata Foundation down in Christchurch. We're one of the 12 community trusts with Audry, who runs Foundation North up here. Not to be confused with the Gaming Machine Trust, which I see Ben's in the room, but we come from the banking sector. So between Audrey and I, we sit on a large pot of money, and every year we try and make a bit to give away to the community. And so that's kind of where we're from, and that's where I am.
Ka pai. Thank you, Leighton. And Audrey McLaren, over to you for a brief introduction about yourself and Foundation North, whose kaupapa is really centred around Titiriti.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you for that. So as Leighton said, we're one of the community trusts. Foundation North was previously called ASB Community Trust, and many of you may know us from that previous name. Our journey with Titiriti has been slowly, somewhat all of a sudden. And it takes a long time to change your waters and to gain momentum. And you will see from the work that we've been doing with Ngāti Whātua, from the Titiriti journey documentation that we have on our website, that we have changed our waters and our way of engaging and thinking about the world and understanding our place in the world, given that, we were formed in 1988 out of financial services. So that is our whakapapa. That's where we come from. We understand some of where our assets have come from, and it's really important that we understand what we can do with those now to advance equity for all in Aotearoa, and in particular in our rohi. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Audrey. And spotlight now on Paul Brown. So Paul, you've had an incredible career leading some social change and innovation, particularly as ex-CEO of Child Fund. Brief introduction for the audience.
Yeah, tēnā koe, Josh. Paul Brown. Yes, a strange and varied career. I probably wear two hats, well, lots of hats, but two hats that are relevant to you today. I work for an organisation called BoardWorks. Some of you may have met BoardWorks team who developed the governance framework, I think, for Sport New Zealand. We also do a lot of board evaluations for sporting organisations, Crown entities, private companies. So that's one hat I wear. Another hat which is relevant today is I've set up a digital fundraising platform, a collaboration of international aid and humanitarian organisations who respond to really big emergencies. So we don't get out of bed. It sounds very mercenary, but unless more than 5,000 people are affected, we won't kick into gear. So you won't know us yet, but you'll soon see Emergency Alliance. Well, hopefully you won't see us, but when something bad happens, Emergency Alliance will be dominating your screens. So we can talk about collaboration, Josh. But unlike my colleagues, I've been in your shoes. I've always been out trying to get money from these folks, so I know what it feels like. It's hard work, but it's rewarding too. Thank you.
Ka pai. Thank you, Paul. And last but certainly not least, John Saunders, a colleague of mine at Sport New Zealand, is one of the policy leads. So, John, you're going to kick off, with the presentation. So do you want to come up here and brief introduction, and then you can start with the presentation? Ka pai.
Tēnā koutou, katoa. Toitu te whenua, whatu naru te tangata. Ko tēnei te mihi ki te mana whenua, ko John Saunders toku ingoa. E tipu ake ahau ki Devon Ingerangi, ke te noho ahau ki te whanganui a Tara. He kaimahi ahau I ihe Aotearoa Sport New Zealand. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, katoa. So kia ora everyone, I'm John, I'm the policy lead at Sport New Zealand. They don't let me out very often, so it's great to be here to actually talk to you guys. I would have to preface this by saying I am a policy guy, so these slides are not going to be quite as all singing and dancing as some of what you've already seen. But I'm just going to run through a brief overview of some of the research we've been doing and some of the implications we think this has to set the scene for the discussion we're about to have. So, what we've been doing is, over the last 18 months, we've been doing a range of pieces of research to help us get a really good sense of the changes that we think are happening across our sector, and to give us much better evidence base that we can base our kind of our kaupapa on. We've been measuring a number of things. In particular, we've had a look at the economic value that our sector brings to Aotearoa, so the direct financial benefits that come from the play active recreation and sports system. But then we've also had a look at trying to measure some of those intangible social benefits. We all know about the huge benefits that come from being active, the sense of well-being, the community connections, and we've for the first time been able to quantify some of those. We've then also done a piece of work looking at the overall funding of the play active recreation and sports system. So where those sources of funding comes from and how that's changed over time. And then finally, we've got an ongoing series of research into New Zealand's participation habits and how they've changed over time. So I'm just briefly going to share some highlights from each of those. In terms of the economic value of our sector, we found that the direct financial benefits every year that our sector provides is about $4 billion. So it's pretty significant. It's 1.4% of New Zealand's GDP. And that relates to things like the income that comes from jobs, more than 50,000 people employed in the sector, sport and recreation equipment, so consumer spending on uniforms, bats and balls, so on and so forth, and then also construction and maintenance of sport and recreation facilities. So $4 billion in direct financial benefit, which is pretty significant. But moving on from that, when you look at trying to check out the social benefits, what we found was that the sector generates almost $17 billion in social value each year. So this is where we're able to quantify things like the improvements to social cohesion, the improvements in terms of individual life satisfaction that we get when we are active and when we play sport, and the benefits that come from volunteering. And so what that showed us is that there's a strong investment case that we already knew, but this gives us the evidence to back that up. So a social return on investment of more than $2 for every dollar invested. And when you combine the $4 billion of economic value with the social benefits, the $17 billion, it gives a combined overall value of $21 billion, which is pretty significant. Moving on to the research we did around funding, or we commissioned the NZIER to do for us. This looked at the overall funding that comes into the system every year to support people to be active. And that found that there's about $4 billion per year from a wide range of sources. That funding, the overall dollar figure of $4 billion, has stayed relatively static between 2018 and 2022. But when you actually account for inflation, that shows a real-term decline of more than 500 million, about 14%. The biggest single sources of revenue into the system come from local government and membership and participation fees, so people paying their subscriptions. Central government provides only about 10% actually of the overall revenue into the system each year. And what we found within this, when you look sort of slightly lower down, was that if you look at the organised sports system, categorised by NSOs, RSOs and clubs, they've been particularly hard hit, mainly driven by declines in membership and participation fees and income from commercial and sponsorship opportunities. So that organised sporting sector has been seen a reduction of about 20% over that 4-year period. And some of this is just backing up a lot of the messages we've already heard across the last couple of days. Just moving on to the participation research. What we've seen in recent years through our Active New Zealand surveys is an ongoing change in the way that people say they want to be active. We're seeing much more desire for people to be active in more sort of flexible, informal ways, and people are looking for having to switch to more free or cheap activities. We did a piece of research earlier this year looking at the impact of the cost of living on participation, and that showed us that 66% of households reported that they were having to do more free or cheap activities than a year ago. We're also seeing households spending less on, as a proportion of their household expenditure, on recreation and cultural activities, which is the category that includes spending on sport and recreation, our sector. So we know that households are doing it tough, and this is reflected in the data in terms of what they're able to spend on our sector. And perhaps most concerningly of all, there's a steady ongoing decline in young people's engagement with all forms of sport. In the Active New Zealand survey, we ask a range of questions about how young people perceive their engagement with sport. There's about 5 or 6 of these questions. And as you can see from this slide, the trend data here is what's really concerning. So that trend across all of those questions is downwards. Taken in isolation, the individual levels are still fairly high, but it's the trend data that's really concerning. And it's actually the same story for questions about high-performance sport and how Rangatahi perceive high-performance sport. And so that's a cause for real concern. So those are some of the pieces of research we've done. What we've then tried to do is say, okay, well, when you look at all of those and bring them together holistically, and I should say that a number of those pieces of research those reports are already available on our website. But what we've been trying to do is look at what they mean when you consider them holistically. And we think there's 4 themes that come out of those. Firstly, we think we've got an increasingly strong evidence base about the value that our sector provides. We all implicitly, sort of intuitively know the benefits that we can provide, but this gives us a much stronger evidence base to help us tell that story and advocate on behalf of our sector. We know that revenue for the system has declined significantly, and that pressure is ongoing, in particular for the organised sporting system. And we're seeing that message coming from New Zealanders about wanting more flexible and informal and lower cost ways to be active. And the 4th theme that we think that comes from those is that there's an increased need to stay relevant, to make sure that the physical activity opportunities that we're all providing are actually meeting the needs of participants. And we think that's really important if we're trying to address that downward trend that we're seeing from Rangatahi's perceptions of how their engagement with sport. So from these 4 themes, we think there's 3 kind of things that organisations need to consider, which there'll be no surprise to you. You'll already be working on these and thinking about them. But they are, strategies for cost reduction. How can we look at where we can make cost savings in our organisations and in our sector? How can we use new technologies, collaborate better to make real sort of life savings? And then secondly, funding sustainability. What can we do to make sure that organisations can increase revenue and access more sustainable funding sources, perhaps through innovations or working in partnerships with others? And then perhaps most importantly, the need to focus on participant-centred experiences. How can we make sure we know what our participants want or prospective participants want and can deliver the opportunities that meet their needs so that we can reverse that downward trend? So the sort of next steps on this, is about setting the scene for the discussion today. It reinforces the direction of, as I say, a lot of this will come as no great surprise to you, but it gives us that stronger evidence base. It reinforces the direction of our new strategy, which is about to launch. And one of our roles we see as sharing insights and intelligence about trends shaping our sector to help inform decision making. So what we're hoping is that this will be useful information that you can take away back to your organisations to inform the decision making and discussions around the board table and leadership teams. We'll be making this information available in a report shortly, and we're also planning a range of sort of targeted webinars in the coming months to go into this in a bit more detail. But for now, I'll pass back to Josh, and hopefully that's just given a bit of context for the discussion. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thanks, John. We might let you out more than once a year after that. Really helpful, mate. On that, fascinating trends. Some sobering stuff in there, but the thing that jumped out at me was really around understanding the participant. So on that, Leighton, I'd love to come to you first, just around this idea of, from your knowledge and experience working with organisations, how do they understand those customer needs and adapt their offerings for that?
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Look, the first thing that I'd say is, after lunch, it's always a bit of a slow session, so we'll try and keep this a bit more conversational than anything. But the biggest thing is around data, right? And understanding your customer is really important. And one of the things, if you go into the report, you'll see there's a funding stack about how people are funded and how codes are funded. And yeah, there's participation, in player subscriptions, but there's council fees, and there's also philanthropics and others that are contributing to that. And I guess every customer segment, you need to really understand what's really important for them. And data's going to drive that. And so when you think about a funder like us, we've got some really big priorities around equitability, how do we make sure there's equity of access to funding. And so therefore, as a customer, we're looking for something different than you're offering to, say, a council. I don't know about you, but our rates in Christchurch are going up something in the order of 10%. I know that's at the thin end of a wedge because there's more like 20% for people in the room. That is not sustainable long term. So you've got to really think about, well, what does that customer want from me and what is the value that we're creating? So it's not just about the participant journey, although that's a critical piece, and when you see in the stack, it's by far the largest. There's also other customers, and so trying to really understand that customer segment, I think, is a really important part of it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Leighton. Audrey, anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I'm going to stay with Leighton on pick up that rako there around funders as customers. So understanding us in terms of being a customer to you rather than you being a provider to our strategy. Now, we are a customer to you. Now, Foundation North might be, we might be the customer that you need. Again, we may not be, depending on what it is that you're seeking to fund. So understanding your customer, understanding our strategy, understanding our ways of engaging, looking at our data. Now, whether you get to be in front of us or not, that's no reason to not try and get to know as much as you can about the funders within your world. If we go to micro level and look at a group, a single group delivering a service. Now, there is a group that started last year in 2023, ASD Dads. It is fathers supporting their children with autism. Tiny. Man, do they know their customer. It's quite phenomenal. And that every service they deliver is tailored exactly to the whānau who have children with autism. That includes social services, speech therapy. It includes barber haircuts in amongst an 8-kilometre fun run with 650 registrations in 1 month. From nothing to that, because they understand what needs to be provided in order for that whānau, for that customer to come along and enjoy an event. And they are micro in what they understand about the people within their community. And so everything that they will deliver going forward will likely be exactly tailored as it needs to be. And they're on our radar because they grabbed the attention economy. They got out in TikTok, they got out on Instagram, they're out there. So they understand to get our attention as well. Kia ora tātou.
Sorry, Josh, the other thing, I think yesterday, who was here for Philip Mills at the Les Mills thing, right? I don't know whether you thought about this, but it was incredible how he managed to capture his customer over an extended period of time. And I think one thing, the other danger is that you go, okay, I've got a relationship with Foundation North, that's great, 5 years later, is it the same relationship you need? Or has that moved? Because as funders, just as customers do, we shift. We shift with trends, we see the tides that we talked about this morning or heard this morning, and we move towards those as well. So that's probably the other piece. That Philip Mills, what an incredibly smart man that guy is.
Yeah, wasn't he? Great example. Paul, I want to come to you. The other thing that I picked up in John's presentation was just around strategies for cost reduction. So what are those strategies and how can organisations, I guess, optimise efficiency?
Sure, thanks, Josh. Cost reduction, it's negative from the outset. So I'd rather flip it on its head and relate it to what we did at Child Fund and make it cultural. So we've all worked for organisations and got a memo saying you must save 7.5% by next month or whatever it might be. Highly disempowering, and at the same time we're being asked to innovate. So how do you innovate with a falling lid? So by making it cultural, it empowers the team, and as part of that, you've really got to bake in the curiosity for them to understand what the business drivers are, what the customer drivers are too, and get them asking, is what they are doing paying? i.e. is it washing its face? And if it is, who's paying for it? So without that curiosity, cost reduction just becomes a very menial exercise that just as the mantra goes, you can't shrink to greatness. So you've got to flip that on its head, I think, and rather just focus on cutting and cutting and cutting and actually not being able to grow, turn it into opportunity. And that's what we did at Child Fund in terms of encouraging the team to be curious. We encourage the team to fail, which in a non-profit environment is blasphemic. You know, it's a word you don't have in your book. And I remember being at a town hall meeting. We only had a team of 60 people, so we weren't a large organisation, but there was enough. And being challenged by the team saying, but we're not allowed to fail because you'll fire us. And there was this mindset or this murmur that I was personally firing people who failed. So I made it out of my way to go out and celebrate failure. We became really good at failure. And for a leader to say that is encouraging. It's very vulnerable. Failure within reason. I'm not saying who's got the high score of number of bolts that were removed from a pylon last week, but giving people risk and letting understand taking calculated risks and approaching change. And there's a very good book, particularly for the non-profit space, will have adjacencies and relevance to sport, called Lean Impact, written by an American woman who I met. I'd encourage you to read it. And the thesis, if you haven't got time to read Anne Mei Chang's book, was saying, stay in love with your problem. Don't fall in love with the solution. And lots of businesses, sport as well, get so enamored with the solution they've come up with, they forget why they're there in the first place. So make sure your team know why they're there, they make sure they fall in love with the problem, and make sure they're curious.
Brilliant, thank you. Leighton or Audrey, anything to add around cost reduction or operational efficiencies if we're thinking technology, collaboration, shared services, anything that comes to mind from your experiences?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on collaboration. So many of you will know, particularly those of you that work out in the environment, that Jobs for Nature funding is coming to an end. Now this is significant, right? So Jobs for Nature funding came out along with the big waves of funding that arrived during COVID. Now that funding is coming to an end. Many environmental projects were launched during that time, and that means that people have been employed into those environmental projects. Now they need to be creative, they need to be collaborative so that those environmental gains do not slip. Now we might be part of the solution, Rata Foundation might be part of the solution, but we're not going to be all of it. So how will those organisations who have risen up to deliver programs or create programs with Jobs for Nature funding, how will they continue? Now, what we're hearing for Tautokoro is that those organisations, which are generally iwi and hapu led, are talking to one another. They're meeting together to determine how many kaimahi are there. What hours do they work, and in what areas do they work? Can they save as many jobs as possible and continue the environmental work by perhaps sharing the work and having a workforce that moves around from project to project? And so there's an opportunity there for us to look at how, from a funding perspective, how we can maximise the return, the social return of whatever investment that we give. But it takes their collaboration, their thought leadership, their courage to walk through this significantly constrained environment and to do that together. Brilliant.
Thanks, Audrey. And I'll stay with you, Audrey, because I'm interested in the question that we often jump to is how can we get more funding? And it's not, it's definitely part of this conversation, but it's not the only part. But it's one thing that I'm sure we'd like to hear around how do organisations increase their revenue or find those more sustainable funding sources?
Wow, crikey, that's the big question. Hey, and luckily that I'm in a room of friends.
And you've got a big checkbook.
We do, and you'd be really happy to know that our funding budget remains healthy. Each year our trustees have really stewarded our assets so that we can continue to support the communities of Tamaki and Tautokoro, and that's a delight. Now your question around how can you get more funding, well, how can you diversify funding, and that will be a question that each of you are wrestling with if you see that there is constrained funding avenues. I'm going to go back to Tom Irvine earlier today, and what a remarkable presentation from him, inspiring. And you just think 1951, Okahu Bay and Orake are on fire, and they are left with only the urupa at Okahu Bay. And this very short time later, Ngāti Whātua have a balance sheet equal to that of Foundation North. It's so good, it's so remarkable. But we're in a funding relationship with them. How could that be if they have the same asset value as us? They're different sort of assets, but still. The reason that we can sit alongside them, one, it's the right thing to do. Two, is that not the most powerful story that you've ever heard, or one of? And we understand that. They understand us and we understand them, so it's easy for us to come alongside. So your pūrākau, your story, is probably one of the most powerful things that you have. So help us understand you. Yeah.
Brilliant. Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to thank you. Audrey, just picking up on that, storytelling is critical. I'm glad you mentioned that. And that leads to what are you measuring in terms of we get conditioned to measure outputs that some of our funders demand, but we really should be measuring outcomes, and that often gets lost in the wash. So really encourage getting the right story being told. But you're right, Audrey. I'd also encourage you all, the theme of the conference is connections. You're not doing this alone. Your neighbours are facing the same challenges you are. So how can you join up that thinking and look laterally? You mentioned balance sheets. I'm from the other side of the fence. I get a little bit antsy when I see lazy balance sheets, not in the funders, but even in the non-profit or in the sport landscape where your colleagues are sitting on a shed load of cash, you've got no operating budget, and you want to grow. So it needs a bold conversation to say, hey Josh, you're sitting on a lot of money that's doing nothing, it's going mouldy in the cupboard. How could we convert that to achieve greater outcomes? In doing so, make it not just about your organisation, but about Josh's organisation. So as we formed our collaboration of aid organisations and humanitarian organisations, one of the things we have as one of our sort of principles is leave your egos and your logos at the door. We all work under one banner, so forget what sport you play or what code you belong to, what's the outcome we're all seeking. So I think if you can work alongside that and leverage balance sheets, get the storytelling right, I think there's some opportunity.
Excellent. Leighton?
Yeah, although there kind of needs to be also a reality check around that. And what I mean by that is that Rata and other funders fund along the lines of purpose. So you've really got to get clear about, we heard from the last panel around sponsorship and looking for much more vertical alignment through their sponsorships. It's not just a transaction, it's more I'm looking for the right values and the right purpose and the right alignment. And funders are the same. That's the direction of our sector, because we're really conscious about the cost in which to fill out applications and process applications and all. And so if we can reduce that burden through a partnership and an engagement relationship, I think that's a big part of it. But also too, I think the whole funding stack, so unusual in the cycle that the whole funding stack is looking wobbly. So normally if the gaming machines are down, then the markets are going okay, and we've got some flex in there. If we're hurting a little bit, the Crown's sort of looking to spend money, and so there's this kind of buffering through the funding group. I'm not seeing that at the moment. I think for the first time we're really starting to see all parts of the funding model get stressed. And so one of the challenges that you're going to have to be really clear about is how do you get greater purpose alignment? Because we're going to be looking to fund things that align to our purpose. So back to the question, I often get asked, how do I get more money? So the first question is, how do I get the money? And once I've got money, how do I get more of it, right? And the answer is you've got to align better and deliver more of our priorities. We're agnostic to the code. I hate to say that to you, but actually we don't particularly care about the mechanism. We care about the participant at the back end. We care about our communities and the people we're serving. So whether that's, I had an interesting conversation with the badminton and the squash crowd today. We're agnostic. I don't particularly like or dislike either of them, but I do care about the people that they're serving. And I think that's a reframe of how it goes.
Can I just pick up on what Leighton was saying? And yes, you're right, there's a reality check about money. We're talking about money, but I'd also encourage you not to talk about money in terms of you can get caught up in being in the money-grabbing business, which we're not in. We're actually in a people business. So how do we achieve, come back to your word purpose, or how do you have a bold conversation with your funder? And there's a tension too that you get great funding from foundations such as my colleagues to my left, but they can become dependencies too. So how do you politely challenge your funder and say, I love your money, but you're restricting me from innovating because I can't find new ways of achieving outcomes, my purpose or our joint purpose, because your money is quite constrained. So how can you elevate the conversation and say, we're in this together to say we want to actually get more impact or more outcomes. We don't want more money, that might enable that, but we want more outcomes. How do you shift the conversation up a gear and make it more purposeful?
Going to come to you, John, quickly.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight one of the things that I didn't actually present in the data, but because we know everything is tough, but one of the things that you see in that funding data is actually there are sectors that are doing okay. So gyms and fitness revenue is actually up. So it's worth thinking about what is it that they're offering that people are still willing to spend money on, even in times when household disposable income is down. They're obviously offering something that people really want part of. When you look at things like CrossFit, that's grown enormously in the last few years, there's something there maybe around community connection. There's something that they're offering that is really connecting with people. And so it's obviously worth thinking about trying to unpick what those things are that are really resonating for people.
Brilliant. And so final rapid style fire question. 30 seconds to answer this next question, okay? And we'll start, John, start at your end. Considering where you think the funding and participation landscape is going to look like in 5 to 10 years, what are some actions that organisations can take now or in the next 12 months to set themselves up for that future?
So I think, and this is a theme that's come through from the conference, I think is this idea of values alignment. I think we're going to see an increasing shift towards organisations funding, willing to provide funding for organisations that are aligned with their values. And as well as this, I think understanding who those funders might be and what your real purpose is and how you can connect with those shared values will be really important. And I think that will also apply from the participant perspective. We saw from some of the previous presentations that rangatahi are increasingly kind of purpose-driven, and so they have a real sense of environmental awareness and sustainability. So, they're going to become more kind of conscious consumers, I guess. So if your organisation can demonstrate that actually you're an environmentally sustainable organisation, for example, then you might be able to connect better with those participants and bring in more participants and funds potentially.
Brilliant. Audrey, 30 seconds on the clock.
Know your 14-year-olds, I think, in 10 years' time. They'll be emerging from education and training and going into the workforce 10 years' time. So know them now. So spend 6 months sharing your information, gathering more information and iterating your offerings and adopt that mindset of curiosity and adaptability. I think that's what we do in the next 6 to 18 months. Yeah. Kia ora.
I think it's about reframing from shifting from a cost to value and how you're creating value for your users or your participants. There is an older bubble that are coming through. It is about our young people, but there's also a growing ageing population that you need to really rethink about your codes. How does rugby engage a 65-year-old in play? It's a really tough question. The minor cost savings, you should be doing those now. If you have not hunkered down, the message you should have heard in the last 2 days is you need to hunker down, make sure that you've got your cost controls in place. But equally, I think if you are looking for major cost savings, then that usually involves some sort of change in business model and how you're making your money. So think fast, good luck. We're here to help.
I'd say, probably riffing off what Audrey said, know your customer. Keep asking why they like your sport. Second order, third order, fourth order. Keep asking them why they're involved. Because I think the first order learning may not be the actual deep insights that are where the value lies. I'd also suggest next 6 to 18 months, be vulnerable. Drop your walls, go see your neighbours in another code or another sport or another community adjacent to you and find out what they're going through. start working together now.
Brilliant. Thank you. We do have some time for questions from the audience. Jenny May, have we got some through on the app? All right, question here. How do you measure impact of what you do as a funder? Who would like to pick that one up?
There's not a one-size-fit-all. There's a number of different models that are out there. I know the work that Sport New Zealand did used to crowd IHI research. We use them as well. I know they did a bit around the Rugby World Cup. So there's a whole bunch of qualitative and quantitative data that you need to collect. Organisations like the Impact Lab measuring social return on investment and a monetary value is really aligned to the government system. So if you see government as being a particular funder, you really need to get your head around social return on investment. But for us, we're not really driven by that. We're probably more driven by the qualitative. Don't know about you, Audrey?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. So there's a couple of options here, and we examine both with our trustees. One is that real deep narrative. What is the change that occurs from our funding? So that could be at a hyper-local it could be a hyper-local setting, or it could be landscape setting. So let's say if we're just looking at outputs of pest eradication, that's one thing. But then you saw, and we fund a lot of pest eradication, then you saw that incredible story from Auckland Golf, right? That tells this wonderful story of impact. And those narratives come to us and they help determine our next iteration of funding, or the next lean-in. So those narratives. We also collect a lot of output data, and I can give you loads of that. But yeah, the deep narrative, deep hyper-local or landscape is really important. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, please.
One more to look out for is an Australian model called the Huber Social Wellbeing Framework. Huber as in the cabs, but with an H in front of it. Well worth looking at.
Brilliant. Great question here from Simon. So how can sport and recreation leverage social impact, investment through funders, and are there any examples of best practice?
Yes. Let's go with Touch New Zealand. I believe that they were an award winner last year, I think, for Kura Connect and Community Connect, and what's the other? There's one other program that they delivered that came out of Finland. Planet You. Thank you. Yeah, out of Iceland. Right. That isn't that, and we're a partner in funding that. It's remarkable because you're talking about using sport as a vehicle. Code agnostic, but well done, Touch New Zealand. Sport as the vehicle for social change, therefore measurable social investment and return. So if we did an impact lab on it, there'll be some big numbers that come out of that. But you're talking about MOJ, you're talking about New Zealand Drug Agency being part, ACC being part. It's fantastic. It has a diversified funding model, massive impact through social change, measurable social return on investment. Sport is the vehicle only. Anyway, kia ora, well done, Touch New Zealand.
Couldn't agree more. And being a sport agnostic and not knowing much about sport, that's your domain. I think the next pandemic we're facing will be one of loneliness, and that's where I think sport can actually, through its connections, can play a part. So you're right. Look laterally, MSD, health, aged care. Are there other networks you can connect with to try and combat loneliness?
And I think just building on that, I know Shamabeel said yesterday he was talking a bit about public health spending, and I don't think he was that optimistic about our ability to kind of unlock some of that spending for our sector. I'm a bit more optimistic about that. I think there is a growing awareness of the, and there's heaps of hard evidence and data, but a growing awareness of the real value that physical activity can have as a vehicle to deliver broader health and wellbeing outcomes. And I think over time we might be successful in trying to be able to unlock some of that broader health system funding to support physical activity as part of a more kind of holistic approach to some of these things. It's not going to happen overnight, I don't think, but I think it is a positive opportunity that we can investigate.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. There are some more really great questions on here, but we have come to the end of the panel session. So these superstars will be around for the rest of the afternoon. So I encourage you to seek them out and ask those questions if we haven't got round to yours today. So to all of you, thank you so much for your contribution to this kaupapa today. I think we've all learned something and you've added some value around these trends. So really helpful. So please, round of applause for Audrey, Paul, Leighton and John. Nate the Great, our superstar grad, is on here.
Nice, Nate.
Thank you. And I guess just quickly to close, short mihi to matariki. So matariki tohu mate, rātou ki a rātou, matariki tohu ora, tātou ki a tāhou. Hei matariki, nā mihi koutou ki a paitora.
Is Jazz here? Awesome. Yay.
Well done, John.
Thank you for coming in earlier. Really appreciate it. Thank you again to our panel. Fascinating discussion. Hopefully we're all a little bit wiser on how we can apply for some funding.